Hi there, my name's George Agan and I'm a Chartered Financial Planner. One of the main reasons for setting up this channel was to try and get people a bit more engaged with financial planning. When I first got started in this profession, it really surprised me about how much I learned about personal finance, which are really essential to understand. But we don't really sit people down and go over it. However, it can have a massive impact on everyone's lives. In this video, I'm going to go over the 10 things schools don't teach you about money. So number 1, you don't need a reason to save. This may seem obvious, but understanding this is huge. So often saving is considered with a goal in mind, be it a house, car or whatever. Saving for a goal makes sense in a predictable world, but our world isn't predictable. The ability to understand that in life, putting a bit of money aside, even if you don't have a specific purpose to it, can be the difference to incredible amounts of stress when those unpredictable moments come up and being okay. Saving is boring, but if you're always doing it in preparation for a specific goal, which is, let's face it, normally buying something, then it's going to get entirely depleted and you lose the real benefit of having savings, which is the protection and flexibility against uncertainty. Understanding saving as a habit is really important, and there's actually some research from 2010 from a paper, Simplification is the Key, Stimulating and Unlocking Long-Term Savings. The question was asked to whether non-savers might start saving. As you can see, the older you get, the more likely it is that that'll become never. So start early, you don't need a reason to save, the habit is an achievement. So number 2, you are your most valuable asset. Now this might only apply to those younger ones watching it compared to someone who's near retirement, but this has two meanings to this statement. First is a broader statement, say invest in yourself, your skills, your health as much as possible, because you're likely the biggest wealth creator going forward, so that makes sense. The second is an underappreciated area. If you are in any way reliant on your income, you need to think about insuring yourself. Chances are your entire financial plan is reliant on your ability to get up, go to work, your human capital. In the book, Are You a Stock or a Bond by Professor Milvisky, he describes a great way to think about this is, imagine you're CEO of You Inc. You start your life as a subsidiary of Parents Inc. and for the first 2 decades of the business, You Inc. is an unproductive liability on their balance sheet. Parents Inc. haven't received a dividend since you incorporated, and quite frankly, they're looking forward to when You Inc. becomes a separate entity. You Inc. can't really tap into the capital markets beyond leveraging the possibility of its future cash flows from the business, and at some point, You Inc. might consider a merger and acquisition, known as a marriage, and then possibly creating some smaller subsidiaries. This will really be a drain on the balance sheet, but You Inc. is quite hopeful that these new ventures become the new Microsoft. However, sadly, in the mid-stage of the second decade, it's looking more like Blockbuster Video. Anyway, as the CEO of You Inc., the problem that you've got is in the early years of the company, it's really reliant on its cash flows, which is the only realistic way it can grow its assets. While it is expected to be a productive business, if the production line fails, the cash flow disappears. So, the CEO has a chance at reasonable cost, putting in some downside protection. So if the production line fails, the downside protection will kick in and make sure the business doesn't go under until it's back up and running again. So think about it that way. In the 3 golden rules of personal finance, which I'll link to, I go over the basics of considering protecting your human capital. Think about it. So number 3, there is good debt and bad debt. So the distinction here is that debt taken out for an asset which is going to grow in value over time is considered good debt. The more common one of this tends to be buying a home. Now you can go bankrupt on good debt if it's not managed right, but it's just about creating that distinction between the two and what they can do for future you. Good debt tends to be secured on the value of an asset that can grow over time, so really you're taking out leverage in the hope that it'll increase your net worth for the future. Does that mean you're guaranteed to turn out better? Of course not. But you're paying interest and you're getting something back in return. There's an expectation in exchange for the debt, there's an increase in the value of the asset over time and your net worth with it. Bad debt is generally unsecured debt, which has no real purpose apart from allowing you to purchase whatever it is at the outset. The problem with bad debt is that it starts small but it compounds. Let's be clear, this is dead money. You gain nothing from it, you're making the bank richer at your expense. What you get at the end is nothing, and unlike building wealth, you're in a position now where your time has gone from working for you to against you financially. Now, I'm not saying don't use credit cards. Short-term lending sometimes is necessary and makes sense, but just be really careful with this, as to build wealth, time works for you, and to destroy wealth, time works against you. So number 4, the difference between saving and investing. Sometimes these two get conflated, but they are very different, and you should be coming at both with a very different mindset. Saving is something you're doing for a specific goal, normally over a short period of time, so generally 3 to 5 years. So that's like building an emergency fund is a completely legitimate reason to save. It doesn't have to be something you buy, as I said in point 1. You've already set the purpose and you know it's not in the too distant future, so you're not as bothered about inflation. So investing is for your future consumption. You are putting the money to work, normally for at least 5 years and ideally multi-decades. The ups and downs along the way are part of the deal going in. There'll always be a charge for investing as you're gaining access to the markets, but with it comes the chance to maintain and increase the value of your wealth over time. You should be going in with understanding that these are very two different things, and mentally you need to approach them in different ways. You need to get your savings in order so you're financially in the position to invest, and investing is what will make you wealthy. So number 5, starting early is better than finishing strong. So I was going to call this number give about your pension, but I thought it was a bit narrow. The thing is, starting to invest early can be more important than finishing strong because that's how compounding works, and that really is the magic. Let's see with an example. We've got person 1 and person 2. They both experience the same 6.5% annual investment returns after fees and charges. The only difference is when and how often they save. Person 1 invests £10,000 per year, beginning at 25, ending at 35, they stop. They've invested for 10 years and 100 grand in total. Person 2 invests the same 10 grand, but they begin where person 1 left off at 35. They then begin investing all the way up to 65 and continue at £10,000 per year. At the end, at 65, person 2 has invested 300 grand. Person 1 ends up with 950,588, person 2, 919,892. So despite there being a £200,000 more put in by person 2, the time they started investing and the impact of compounding meant they finished behind person 1. That sounds crazy, isn't it? But it's true. And a real life example, Warren Buffett is currently worth about $87.5 billion. Did you know that 83.7 billion of that was earned after he hit 65? Why did he earn 95% of his wealth in later life? Well, look at all those Warrens. I mean, also he's old, but that's how compounding works. I mentioned this at the end of the 3 golden rules of personal finance, and it's quite hard to wrap your head around the figures, but it just reinforces the importance. And as I say in the video, there is a cost as far as inaction. Now, obviously past performance isn't a reliable guide to future returns, and these are all assumptions, but it's something to think about. Cash is not always king. So the biggest mistake I see is that people hold large amount of cash and say it's safe. Now, if you don't want to invest, that's fine, and I'm not trying to convince you, but cash isn't a safe place over a large period of time. For over a decade, it's been really difficult to beat inflation. Watch my video on managing inflation, where I go over why that can be such a problem. It's basically a one-way ticket to be a surefire way of losing your buying power of your wealth. Cash can be king in the short term, but a pauper in the long. If you think about families and businesses that generate multi-generational wealth, there's a reason they didn't achieve that by spending decades sitting on a big pile of cash. Investing isn't gambling when it's done right. Okay, so my personal gripe with sometimes a bit of the financial service industry is that we throw around risk warnings with no context, and there's no real education in place, which leaves people confused. So maybe you've seen in a few ads capital at risk and been like, what does that mean? So let's try and explain it fairly. With investments, you are taking a level of risk and the return isn't guaranteed. That's why you get a higher level of return than, for example, cash. You're paid for the uncertainty. Everything has its price, but not all prices are shown on labels. The problem is investing is often conflated and thrown together, which are things that are just plain wrong. And sadly, there are a lot of scammers out there that tap into this misunderstanding. So let's put together a scale of speculating and gambling to sensible investing, where we start on the left, which is my right, which is speculating and gambling. I'm not saying there's no skill in these elements, but the evidence shows it's very, very hard to make money consistently through this. You've probably seen lots of apps advertised. So here we've kind of got day trading, swing trading, all that stuff, where it's actually quite hard to distinguish from gambling. This is my personal view, but it's no way to manage your life savings. And we start to move between the two, where we get into things like individual stocks. So not quite speculating, but certainly a high chance of losing your money. See the video Understanding Your Investments Part 2 for a bit of an explanation about why individual stocks statistically can put you a bit on the back foot. Also, time horizon is very important, and that could push you on either side of the scale, whichever way you look at it. So you could argue reasonable risk, but proceed with caution. And then we've got on the right, or my left, a well-diversified multi-decade investing. Now, even on the left, there isn't a guaranteed positive outcome. But what you're tapping into is the progression of the best companies in the world, human ingenuity, and while there are going to be ups and downs, in my view, it's reasonable to expect a positive return, certainly if you look at all financial history. And even if you don't decide to, you are actually ending up tapping into this anyway through your employer or your pension. The problem is when people throw this scale together and they're thinking they're all the same thing, which they're not, and it's absolutely killer. So number 8, don't neglect life admin. So this might not land as well with international viewers if there are any, but in the UK there are two big documents that if you have any sort of assets or a family that depend on you, that you need to be thinking about. Wills. So this is basically instructing how your assets and your estate will be distributed if you die. If you don't in the UK, it will fall under the rules of intestacy. There's a link in the description explaining this, but chances are it might not be what you want and it could cause all sorts of family and maybe even tax issues. So we all hate thinking about death, but just remember that writing a will doesn't make you any more dead than talking about sex makes you any more pregnant. So I suggest please do your work and think about it, because peace of mind, if anything happens, then you know it's sorted. And now power of attorney is the second one, and this basically means should you be incapacitated, and this can be all the horrible stuff like strokes, car accidents and all the rest of it, your designated attorney can keep things moving instead of being locked out of your accounts. You can have a power of attorney for financial decisions or health and well-being decisions. I would always suggest getting both done. And then the final thing is a common sense one but important thing, which is just always keep track on your bills. When I was 18, I made a really stupid mistake. I'd missed a council tax payment and then I moved. Anyway, by the time the letter found me, I'd racked up loads of extra fees and it had hit my credit score. I know it's an obvious one, but just remember the whole financial system is set up to kick you if you ignore things like this, so be careful. So 9, risk is generally misunderstood. One of the biggest differences between successful investors and someone who's just learning is that experienced investors don't associate risk as just volatility. Volatility is how much investment goes up and down. It's a completely natural byproduct of a functioning market. Instead of seeing the risk as the ups and downs, you should see risk coming from the different types of risk. One is the risk of inflation eroding your buying power. Watch the video on managing inflation for that. 2 is the risk of losing all your money or your capital. That's permanent loss risk. And then 3 is volatility, which is the ups and downs. I'm going to be doing a video going into this at a later stage. Now 10, money can't buy you happiness, but it can give you choice. Money is not the most important thing in life. In fact, being too money driven for money's sake can be destructive. And I'm not saying capitalism is perfect. It's far, far from it. But bringing it back to the individual level, I think it is a good thing to try and be financially secure. And I think it's something we can all try and achieve. Not because anyone has to have a certain type of consumerist fed lifestyle, but because being financially secure can give you choice. Money is a tool to help you achieve the goal, not the goal itself, but the goal can be as individual as life is. Being financially strong can give you choice, and that's how you shape your life. And I think that is worth thinking about. To quote Brian Portnoy, true wealth is the ability to underwrite a meaningful life. This has been Principles Personal Finance. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next week. See ya.